only focus on the end goal often end up failing more but giving up quicker.
How do you forgive your parents, especially when they don't admit their mistakes?
No. The journey is what builds the stable foundation.
Okay, so let's dive in then. So I think it's a pretty universal experience for people to kind of have this almost like an existential crisis in their 20s. You graduate, and I remember feeling it myself. Like, I remember it really distinctly where, I was in college and I lived in a dorm and I was so close to all of my friends. And then one fine day, we were all supposed to leave and disperse, and everyone was going to different places. And the city that I was in, which was Toronto, all of a sudden felt so big. So, why is it that we all have this universal experience?
Oh my goodness, I could talk about this till the sun goes down. I think everyone thinks it's because obviously like the first answer is this is just such a confusing time because you're transitioning from what I would call like premature adult to like full-blown adult. The thing that really I think solidifies the crisis is timelines. And what I mean by that is like everyone that you know is on a very similar timeline. If you went to uni, for example, that timeline has been aligned since you were probably like 4 years old, probably since you were born. Like we all went to, primary school. I don't know what it's called over here, but we all went to school. We went to high school. We went to uni if that's what you did. And then it's like, okay, everything is just everything fractures and splinters and everyone's paths just explode in a million different directions, and it's not all aligned to this common experience that is like just getting your degree or graduating or getting through your education. And suddenly like everyone's pace starts to differ, and it kind of comes up along the way, if you know what I mean. Like, so it's like, yeah, people start meeting their partners maybe earlier or later. People start getting accepted to grad jobs maybe earlier or later. People have had maybe more traveling. But I think like post-graduation in particular is a huge point of crisis for people, because it's like, oh my gosh, suddenly everyone is doing something different to what I'm doing, and the level of comparison just heightens and makes us feel so anxious and like we're doing everything wrong.
It's so true. And I also think that, I'm someone who always looks at everything from like a glass half full sort of thing. So,
Mm,
for example, when it's come to social media, it's always been like for me, when I look at other people succeeding, it's always been a point of inspiration for me. But
mm,
on the flip side, I also understand that when you have access to social media, especially in your 20s, where maybe you've just graduated, you're vulnerable, you're confused, maybe you're a little bit lost, and then you see everyone succeeding, quote unquote, in all of these different facets of life. And you suddenly feel this pressure not just to succeed in a specific facet of life, but to succeed in all of them
mhm.
because you've cherry picked what you want to see. Like, say, for example, like Sally on the internet has the perfect relationship, and then you feel behind there. And then, oh, like Ken has the perfect job. You know what I mean? Or like
Yeah,
so and so is like super wealthy and has their finances in
yeah.
order. It's insane.
It's like that this pressure to be doing it all, and it just feels like there is a race to some like imaginary finish line. And what I
Mhm.
always tell people is like, if the finish line is basically getting it all done, having everything worked out, you are never going to be there. The only time you'll probably be there is on your deathbed where you can't do anything more. So what are you rushing towards? What are you really, what is actually ever going to feel complete for you? Because there is even this like idea of gold medal syndrome, right? Even if you achieved all of those perfect things, something is still going to feel wrong. You're always going to find a way to feel dissatisfied. So I think addressing like the quarter life crisis or addressing just an existential crisis is about just being, and I know it's going to sound ridiculous and so simple, but like just being happy with what you have, but also realizing that if you place all this importance in having what seemingly is perfect, that is setting you up to be miserable. Like you will never be happy. No one I know who has it all has ever been happy with having it all,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also I do think as well it's very difficult to have it all at once
Mm,
so quickly, you know?
yeah.
I mean, I think about it, right? And I think about who I was, say, for example, like right when I graduated from college.
Mm.
And say, for example, a genie showed up and the
Mhm.
genie was like, okay, let me grant you all of these things that you've wanted this whole time.
Mm.
If I had been granted all of those things, I almost wouldn't be the human being that I am today who's earned it, who knows how to handle all of those things as well. Does that make sense?
It literally makes so much sense. I was just listening to that thinking about my own life
Mhm.
and being like, yeah, you know what really makes me so happy right now are the things that initially I saw as failures. You know what else? There's this quote. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna quote Taylor Swift, which
Mhm.
is not where I think people would think I would quote here, but she has this one lyric that's like, I never trust elevators that rise too fast, it won't last. And that is how I always feel when I'm like, I want to get there quicker. I want to be wherever I need to be right now. It's like, no, 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 no. The journey is what builds the stable foundation for reaching the point that you want to be at and actually being like, no, I worked for this. I learned from this. I also know that even if this were to go away tomorrow, I would still be okay because I've done it all and I've been through the process of finding the right person for me, of finding the right career for me, of building my finances, of building my self-love or my health back up. Like that, I think we really like romanticize the end goal. And there is this concept in psychology, got to bring it in
Of course.
naturally, called learned industriousness, which is basically like the premise of this concept is people who only focus on the end goal often end up failing more but giving up quicker.
Huh.
And people who fall in love with the process and who are like, I don't really care where I end up. I just really like doing this thing and I really like learning and I really like just like I could be in love with the journey for the rest of my life and never fully get my goal. Those are the ones who end up doing really, really well.
I love that you actually bring this up because
Mm,
there's science to prove this specifically that I've read when it comes to working out,
mm,
whereby people who fall in love with the act of movement, right?
mm,
Whatever movement that may well be, it could be weightlifting, Pilates, walking, long walks, whatever it is, they're more likely to stick to that and make it a habit for the rest of their lives versus people who are working out as a means to an end. Does
mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm gonna bring another theory. Literally, what you're explaining is the theory of, I think it's like the theory of behavioral change.
Uh-huh.
And there is this spectrum between like extrinsic motivation and intrinsic and integrated motivation. Extrinsic motivation is being like, I need to work out because I'll feel guilty if I don't, because I need to be thinner, because society expects it from me, because my partner won't love me if I don't look a certain way. Just terrible, terrible source of motivation. Let's apply that to like life. I need to be absolutely number one in my career because otherwise I'll disappoint my parents, because otherwise no one will love me, because otherwise everyone's going to think I'm a failure. That's extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation for the working out example is like, because I love this, because I feel good, because I actually like just enjoy the process. And that's like, no, I want to pursue this goal because I actually love the art of making things and I love seeing my results and I just actually enjoy it and I get into a flow state. You can really see like which one is going to propel you for longer. I love that you brought that up. It's one of
Yeah.
my favorite theories.
It I mean, and it's so true, right?
Mm,
Because I mean, I can like again, going back to this working out example, like I can pinpoint when when I was in college where working out used to be this like thing that I would force
mm,
myself to do almost as like a punishment versus when I fell in love with it, it became a completely different thing. It's like a
mm,
meditative act of love that I do for myself because it keeps me mentally strong and resilient and allows me to
yeah.
show up as the best version of myself. Like those are two different approaches to the same thing, you
Yeah.
know?
I saw this video the other day that reminds me of what you were saying, of this girl being like, going to the gym is like it's just alone time. It's like a date with myself where I get
Yes.
to like get my blood pumping and I get to like feel really in tune with my body. And there were all these comments underneath it being like, I've never thought about it like that. And it's crazy that something so simple of like, maybe you should just find a way to think about this as an act of self-love or as a positive thing rather than as a guilt thing or a shame thing.
Mhm.
Just like completely changes your life. I'm the same with working out now. And you know what else? I sorry, total tangent. Something that I'm like doing this year is like I'm not going to exercise in a way that I don't want to. Or like,
Oh,
so I
yes.
don't like HIIT workouts, but I love boxing or like going for a run or doing yoga. And it's like every time you force yourself to do something in a way that you actually don't like to do it, it's like you're just gonna hate it eventually. You're
Yes.
building bad habits around a bad attitude.
I honestly couldn't agree more. And going back to this, what you said is actually so important because when I was younger, when I was in college, I used to think that the only form of working out was running.
Me too.
And I used to hate it.
Yeah,
Gemma,
yeah,
hate. Oh my God.
yeah.
Awful. Bane of my existence.
Oh
Never
my
enjoyed
god.
it. Couldn't get into it. And so then again, it was this like punishment, and I would never really enjoy it. So I could never be consistent. Then over time, I started exploring all kinds of different workouts. And then I landed on like weightlifting and Pilates and boxing. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun.
Mm.
I love this.
Do you think that like the running thing comes down to like how obsessed we were with like weight loss?
Yeah, honestly, that. And then
Mm,
also, look, I was in college in like 2010s, right? So I graduated in 2013.
mm,
Back then, it was just like, honestly, I think it was a deficit of information, right? Like, I
mm.
remember I found Pilates um, on YouTube through, I don't know if you've heard of Blogilates. She's like,
I knew you were gonna say that.
yeah, but that's how
I was like, I love her.
she's so I love her, but, like,
Mm.
I owe so much of my fitness journey to this girl, like, I don't know her, she doesn't know me, but I'm like, thank you," like, just sending you good energy. But, yeah, I was like, "Wow, like, this can be
Mm,
fun," you know? And so when you crack that, it's really interesting. So I think, going back to what you're saying about people being in pursuit of the destination, it's so
mm.
important to love the journey. Like, it's the same thing, right? Like, if you have a career that you hate, but the end goal is money, like, what kind of life are you living?
I don't understand people who can wake up and pull themselves out of bed like every single day, 30 days a year if they take leave. And I think that that's also what contributes to a bit of an existential crisis.
Absolutely.
Like, I honestly think I had like a mini one recently where I was thinking about success so wrong,
Mhm.
and it was making me so stressed, and it made me not love what I was doing.
How are you thinking about it? Are you am I
Um,
able to ask that?
no, I'm wondering if I'm able to answer it like in a way that isn't a feeling.
Mhm.
It was just an obsession with what's next rather than thinking about the present.
Yeah.
So I like did this event and it went so well and I was so happy. And the next day I was immediately being like, okay, well, what's going to be the bigger thing now? And I was like, I didn't even get to enjoy that. That's so disappointing. I didn't even get to enjoy that. And a constant sense of like, you need to be evolving or you're kind of done. And I feel like, okay, I'm going to have like an kind of get deep here, but do you feel like that as well, like in podcasting and if you have anything to do with social media?
And everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I feel
Yeah.
that way, and I've been really like, this has been actually, like, an ongoing goal of mine to, like,
Mm,
sit in it because I read somewhere, and you can tell me if you've come across this as well, that mentally as human beings, once we feel like we're almost at the goal, we've like moved on to the next mentally, right? Like when
mhm,
we're like, let's say like 80% of the way there, then we've moved on to the next thing. And our mind is immediately, okay, how do we top this? Or like, what's the next big thing? And
mm,
so then you never really get to like sit and think, okay, like
mm.
I've really accomplished this and like let me just enjoy this, you know?
I don't think I've ever done that.
So this is something that I mean, look, I completely relate to this, right?
Mm,
Because I mean, my husband and I, we own our business together.
mhm,
And we noticed that we were constantly on this hamster wheel of like, okay, we've accomplished this in our brains, it's done once it's like close enough. Okay, what's the next? What's the next? And so
mhm,
last year, four really big milestones happened all at once.
mm.
Okay.
Can you tell me what they are? I feel like we need to.
Yeah. Okay. So we had gotten our visa for the US.
Yay,
We
huge.
had gotten our house. We had closed a fundraising round and we had a massive display at a retail store.
Oh
Those
my gosh, they're
right?
huge.
Like 4 big things.
Yeah.
And mentally, we were like we hadn't even acknowledged it. It was just like the next thing. And then
Yeah.
I was like, no, 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 Nish, what are we doing here? Like, we
Yeah.
can't just be like, okay, great, like next one. No, like we need to actually celebrate this. And I remember so distinctly, like we went out for dinner, which we do every Friday, but like we took time to like reflect on what it took to get there and
Mm,
how proud of ourselves we were that we
mm,
had gotten there because all of those things individually were so difficult to achieve, so difficult. And I just think that we move on to the next, like long before we've already achieved the goal. We've achieved the goal. And so then we don't get to sit with that, you know?
Mhm. I'm the same. It's really refreshing to hear you say that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Also just congrats.
Thank you.
The funding round as well, and consistent like, all those things are huge. And I also think it comes down to a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I know that, like, term gets thrown around a lot, but if you feel like the only thing that the ship is being built on is just, like, energy and moving forward and just, like, propelling yourself forward, you're never going to, like, slow down and stop to appreciate the work,
Mm.
right? And I always used to give this analogy of, like, imposter syndrome is like feeling like you're trying to build the car while you're going 100 miles down the freeway, and if you slow down, everything is going to collapse. And everyone else is, like, passing you in their perfectly manufactured cars already built, and you're the only one who doesn't know what they're doing, and you're the only one trying to pull it all together. And I really feel like that just creates such a whirlwind in your brain that manifests in a lot of self-doubt.
Mhm.
And it's very easy when you feel self-doubt to just band-aid that with doing more. Firstly, because it just distracts you. Secondly, because it's like, okay, well, no one can say that I'm not working for this. No one can say that, like, I'm not proving that I deserve to be here. I went through, like, a massive period of burnout. I was sick for, like, 3 months, and I feel like no one even saw that because I was like, "This doesn't match the image." Like, I don't want people to know that this is hard for me or that I'm not doing everything, whatever. Like, and it was really at that point that I was like, "Oh, let's take a step back."
Mhm.
Because am I even allowed or able to be creative? Like, it's the distinction between, like, learning brain and survival brain. Like, you can't be curious or vulnerable or gentle or learn when you're only focused on surviving or only focused on being more and producing more and whatever, like, that looks like for you.
Mhm. So what do you do when someone is feeling imposter syndrome and, is just focused on the next thing? Like, are there any things from like psychology that we can apply?
Yeah, so many things. So many things. I think the first thing is actually to do exactly the opposite of what your brain is telling you to do, and that is
Mm.
to slow and you need to slow down. Rest is the most important, I would say, ingredient for growth, for creativity, and just for mental clarity. And anytime I'm, like, getting to this spiral where I'm, like, overworking, have this imposter syndrome, I'm always like, "Yeah, it's time to take a week off." And it's time to take a week off, put, like, and I know this is hard. I'm kinda speaking as someone who works for themselves, so this is
Mhm.
possible because I, you know, can kinda find a way to do this. But even if it's, like, you're at your job, take, like, an afternoon off. Take the weekend off to be away from your phone in any capacity. Take the weekend off to go and do, like, go to the beach, go for, like, a hike. Anything that's going to give you a moment of, like, almost forced rest, and you'll just see how just everything starts to open. It's why, like, I don't know if you find this, you come back from, like, holiday and you have, like, a million different business ideas and you have a million different concepts for things that you wanna do.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this on my podcast, but my husband Nish and I, it's mandatory for us to travel, like do two big trips in a year,
Mm,
three if we can, where we go away for like 8 days, like 7, 8 days,
mm,
basically, like, like 2 weekends and the weekdays, because it is, I would say it's crucial for us as founders because
mm,
you're right. Like there is the learning, or you said learning brain and survival brain,
mm,
right? Those are two different things. And like also I've found, and I wonder if there is psychology to back this up. I'd be very interested to know, but when I'm working on the business or like I'm working on the podcast, I feel like I'm in it
mm.
24/7, right?
Yeah.
So when I remove myself and say, like, we just got back from Italy and I'm very into art history, both my husband and I are.
Mm,
So what we would do is like we would like learn about art history. We had
mm,
these like private tours and we'd go and like just immerse ourselves in that. And every time we'd finish, and like especially when we came back home, we were like bursting with ideas because I almost feel like focusing my brain onto something else was so refreshing and
mm.
so relaxing at the same time.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And that's the thing, like, you don't need to go to Italy. Oh my, also so fun. But, like, if you're someone who's listening to this being like, "Ugh, I can't afford to go to Italy.
You can do it even in your
You
hometown, though.
can. You
It's
can.
not, you don't have to go somewhere,
I will say one thing that a friend of mine does who I love and whose advice I appreciate, and she is in a completely different field to me, like completely different.
Mm-hmm.
She literally works for like the government.
Mm-hmm.
Like but she does this thing called oh my god, I don't want to screw up what she calls it. Okay, I'll explain what she does. So she does like, let's call it a date night with herself on Friday nights once a month, where she will put her phone on do not disturb and she hides it like in the top of her closet, and she does like one creative thing that she's wanted to do for the last month.
I love that.
Yeah, and she sits down in her living room and she like makes herself a really beautiful meal, all like fresh ingredients. She just sits down and she puts on music or she puts on a podcast and she just lets herself like focus on this one creative task. One time it was like stencil outline drawings. Like she was doing like, I don't even know, she sent me a photo like the next day. She does painting, and it's that thing. It's like tap into a part of you that you wouldn't normally use. Because I think the reason that we get into like a real imposter syndrome spiral as well is because we start centering ourselves too much, and we start thinking that everything that we're doing and everything that we are is sometimes more important than the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think taking a step back from centering ourselves in everything and actually being creative and seeing beauty elsewhere and seeing inspiration elsewhere really, really helps in stopping you from spiraling and staying on the same thought pattern. Like the same thing as you guys in Italy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different part of your brain that you
Yeah.
need to tap into.
But I'm totally going to steal your friend's idea.
She's
Damn.
great.
That's a really, really good tip. I'm going to do that with my husband, actually. It's like, sounds like a really fun thing.
It's really good for couples. Like me and my partner do it a lot. And he the one that he does a lot is Lego.
Oh,
So we'll get like a Lego set
uh-huh.
and we'll put on like music. Like we have a really amazing vinyl collection,
Uh-huh.
and we'll put on music and just talk about anything other than work.
I love that. Oh my
It's
gosh. Okay. I like, I'm gonna implement this somehow, like maybe like this coming month.
You should do it, especially like if like obviously your husband's niche. You both like work in the as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Like it's so heightened, and then like Tom is a lawyer, right? So and
You're both very cerebral.
yeah, and it's like, okay, we need to do something a little bit better for our brains.
Yeah.
Every now and again.
Yeah.
You should do it. Report back.
Absolutely, I will. So the other thing that I want to discuss here is, when you're in your 20s, and I've seen TikToks about this and people talk about this, and I remember so distinctly feeling this way where I felt like I had so many versions of myself,
Oh my God.
and it was like many different possible realities could occur,
Mhm.
where I was like, okay, I can be a fashion writer living in New York, or I can start a business, or I can move to Europe and, do XYZ. Why is that such a universal experience? And what the hell do you do to narrow down what it is you are supposed to be doing?
Oh my gosh, I was about to ask you that question because you've obviously chosen,
Well, I'm 32, so
yeah, and that's like I want to know how you've still got many paths I guess to choose from now. But okay, there is this beautiful analogy by Sylvia Plath, not the most heartwarming figure. So I'm going to put my water down and I'll start that again. Okay, so there is this analogy from Sylvia Plath, and I know she's not the most heartwarming author, poet, but she has this analogy around the fig tree, and it explains how she's sitting at the bottom of this fig tree and she's looking up at all the branches, and each branch is a possible life. And at the end of each branch is this fig, and that fig is a dream. And one fig is to be like an art teacher, one fig is to be a mother, one is to be an author, a poet, a traveler, just all these different possibilities. And she's like, whilst I'm sitting there and I can't choose, all these figs are rotting and it feels like I need to just do something. That is the feeling. And the feeling comes from a sense of choice overload. So choice overload is this concept in psychology. It is one of my favorites, much like the theory of planned behavior, that essentially explains how when we have too many options and too many things to choose from, we might think that helps us when we have more opportunities.
But it's decision fatigue.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's so funny because we are such a lucky generation. Like all those examples of things that you wanted to do. I can't imagine like my mom ever thinking that she could do half the things that I considered doing. I couldn't imagine her thinking that she could run a podcast full time. We are this generation that has been so, so blessed with having so many more options. And we think that that should make us happier because it means we have more freedom. Actually, no, we don't. It creates analysis paralysis where it's kind of like any of these things could be amazing. How do I know which one is the best?
Mhm.
It's a common conundrum. My perspective on it is you can't you can be everything, but you can't be it all at once. And we tend to think about our life as this huge chunk of years extending out in front of us. I like to think of it as seasons.
Mhm.
So the next season is only 2 years long, maybe even 1 year. What's this season going to be about? Is it going to be about what you were already doing? Or do you want to spend the season job hunting for a new career in a completely different industry?
Mhm.
Going back and getting a diploma? Do you want to spend this next season putting everything you got into social media, everything you've got into a blog, into a cooking career? Like, treat life as seasons where you can be that version of yourself for this chapter. And then in like a year's time, you can sit back and be like, oh, do I still like this version? Am I ready for something new?
Mhm.
Is the other version in my mind better than this version?
I love that. That's such sound advice. So, say for example, someone decides on a version and they're like, okay, now I'm going to move. Like, I want
Hmm.
to move to a new city. We were talking a little bit
Yeah, we
offline
were.
about this,
Yeah.
and I was telling you that I think moving is one of the things that made me who I am. It made me
Mm,
more confident. It made me fall in love with my own company. I'm someone who like loves to do
mm,
things on my own. I'm able to make friends really quickly. I'm malleable. I mean, honestly, the list goes on, right?
mm,
But if someone is nervous about moving, and I know you've done an episode on this, which
mm.
I think everyone should go listen to, but what are your tips? Like what should someone expect if they're thinking of moving? What can they do? Any advice?
Yeah, I love what you say about this, like being a foundational part of like who you are. Because I think anyone who has ever moved a lot would tell you the same thing. And I think that's an important thing for you to remember is that, you're sitting here saying this is like made me. I don't think we can be scared of something that makes us who we are. In terms of like solid advice, I was giving my partner this advice probably like a month ago. So
Mhm.
he moved to Sydney for me. We were doing long distance for like a while.
Mhm.
And he's a lawyer, so like he's kind of tied to where his job is. I'm a city girl. I was not moving. He was living in like regional Australia. I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And he moved to Sydney and he won't mind me sharing this. Like he was finding it really, really hard. And I said, you have to remember the 6 month rule. The 6 month rule where whenever you move to a new city, even a new part of your city, it's going to take a new country, even it's
Mhm.
going to take 6 months to take a big like deep breath and like let it out. It's going to take 6 months to meet people. It's going to take 6 months to figure out where you're going on like the train. It's going to take 6 months to find your favorite places. Like, do not make any decision about staying or leaving in that 6 months time. Just be in it for that moment. And I promise you that if you are 2, 3 months in, the time is going to pass. It gets so much easier. Also, routine is your best friend. I don't know if you would say this as well, but if you go to the same coffee shop at the same time, the same grocery store, the same gym classes, the same art classes, the same anywhere, the same pub, bar, like any of those things, you will meet people associated with those places that already live in the place that you live who have the same routine. One of the ways that I made like so many friends when I moved to Sydney was at the gym. There was just this
Mm.
girls that I would always see. And eventually you get talking because it's kind of awkward if you don't, because you see each other every single day. And I have like one of my best friends who is literally in New York with me right now. I met her like at my gym.
I love that.
It was amazing. She's the best.
I love that, and it's honestly such sound advice. Honestly, Gemma, like I would say like especially when you get older, sometimes it
Mm.
takes even a little bit longer and you just have to
Oh,
give yourself grace.
interesting.
Like 6 months for sure, but in order to develop those like strong relationships that people look for and like associated to the feeling of being home,
Mm.
I would say it's like a year before you like really know, okay, like this is like my friend and I'm keeping them for a
Yeah.
long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like because I think a lot of the times, say we grow up somewhere, okay? You have these lifelong friendships, and then you move to a new place and you no longer have those friendships in that same city. And it takes time to develop those bonds. It's not
Mm,
an overnight thing, at least in my experience and my opinion, right?
absolutely.
So I think, but if you stick with it, I think it's very rewarding,
Mm.
you know?
Oh, no, totally, and I like what you said. I think maybe it's, like, 6 months is when you start to be like, "Okay, this isn't all hell," and then
Yes.
a year is when you're like, "Okay, I really wanna stay."
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would say that's the timeline, and I agree with you. I think routine is so good. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, like going to the same places and saying yes to things as well, I think is so important.
And I think, you know what? What we are just naturally talking about right now is friendship. Like, that is the thing that we are naturally coming back to.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is ask your friends, like, "Do you know anyone in the city?"
Love that tip.
Because it's great.
It is.
That's community is built on community, right?
Yes.
Like, rely on the people that you already know and love. It's like getting set up with someone, but, like, having, like, a friendship blind date. I did that so much when I moved to Sydney.
Oh my
It
gosh,
was great.
it's how you should be making friends. Like,
Yeah.
actually, one of my friends, shout out Annabelle, she just went to Paris. She's like also another entrepreneur, and she's in Paris for like 3-4 month period. And we were out on a walk before she left, and she was like, "Do you have any friends in Paris?" And I connected her immediately to like one of my friends who lives in Paris. And that's how you make friends, and that's how a city
Mm.
feels more like home. Because fact of the matter is that I think if a friend introduces you to a friend, they're kind of pre-vetted. They're not a weirdo.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
more likely to get along.
Yeah, it's literally, like, why getting set up by your friends and, like, in dating is so great.
It's true. It's true.
I say as I met my partner on, like, a dating app, but,
I mean, listen,
so
it,
good.
it works that way too,
Yeah.
but like the chances sometimes are a little bit
The
higher this
algorithm set us up.
way.
My best friend.
There we go. So, speaking of friendships, I know that something interesting that happens as we get older is sometimes we can start to outgrow these friendships that we
Mm.
used to have because, it was almost a friendship based on so much commonality. What, like, tell me more about that and like how should someone address it?
Mm. See, I'm gonna ask you, I'm sure it's happened to you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
And I'm sure if I asked anyone on the street, they would say the exact same thing.
Mhm.
Because everyone is constantly evolving. Each of us is constantly learning about ourselves. We're in different chapters, different periods. I know it feels really, really hard, but I just want to say, like, it's so normal. It's so normal. And I think it comes from a place of actually quite a lot of beauty.
Mhm.
And the beauty is that we're never the same for very long. And some people will change with you and they'll change in parallel with you, but no one will ever change at the exact same time. I think my best advice is like keep them for as long as you can. And unless it's like totally necessary, like don't ever cut someone off
Mhm.
just because things are kind of going a different direction.
Mhm.
I had a friend who I was really, really close to in uni, and we kind of drifted. Like, they got a partner, I got a partner. It was that awkward, like, slow fizzle. We outgrew each other. Like a week ago, I get this random message from them being like, "Hey, I would really love to see you. I'll be in Sydney." I don't think I've spoken to them in like 3 years.
Wow.
So leave it open, even if it changes. I know it like feels like a very natural reaction to be like, "I'm hurt by this change. I'm hurt by this transition. I'm gonna cut you off. You're out of my life." Whatever you can do, like try and maintain some of the civility,
Mhm.
and don't just rush to be like, this person needs to be replaced in my life. Like, have you seen that sometimes? Yeah, it's like, okay, I've lost a friend. It's this empty space. It's this
Mhm.
empty real estate. If I don't feel it soon, it will never be filled. I'm gonna be lonely. We catastrophize. We
Mhm.
think that losing one friendship means we're gonna lose every single relationship, not remembering that actually we are quite adaptable and we are really flexible and we are also growing and learning and new people will come into our life who will fill that space.
Yes.
Sometimes it's kind of a blessing.
It is. I mean, I think over time it's really natural. Like it's happened to me, it's happened to so many other people where
Mm.
friendships evolve and I I don't really mourn it. I've like never really cut someone off from my life unless something really horrible has happened. As you've said, I leave it kind of open. But I think, there's that saying that people come into your life for a reason, a season, and a lifetime.
Mm.
And like that's kind of how I view like these various relationships that I've had in my life where, I look back on very fond memories and, if one day they roll back into my life and there's, more for us to connect on, absolutely like that door stays open. But I think trying to replace someone with another person and have them fit exactly into that mold, it's not, you're not even giving someone a chance,
Yeah.
and you're making
No.
it very hard on yourself.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like, think about all the people who have let you go
Exactly.
and let you become a different person, even though they may have not liked it. Like, it's a real sign of love, actually.
Yeah.
I think to let people change, even if they change in a direction that's not the same as you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Very wise words. Okay, so I want to get into audience questions.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so the first one is how to not be afraid and start something in your 20s.
Like, how to not be afraid of,
Like just like
yeah,
start a business. Well, I'm not sure exactly what they're talking
yeah,
about, but start a new endeavor.
anything. Oh, I get that so much. Like the nerves. I think it's like this sense of like, if I'm going to start, I better do it perfectly. No, you just need to start. You need to start building the consistency. I always get people being like, how do I start like a hit podcast? Like, how do I start a podcast? And they really fret over certain questions. They're like, what kind of microphone should I get? I need to make sure that the cover art is exactly perfect and the audio is exactly perfect and everything I say is perfect. That is the wrong way to go about it. You just need to put something out there and to start putting something out there as regularly as possible. You learn over time. You get better over time. I still get like fearful of starting new things because I am such a perfectionist. Nobody like makes a hit their first time. Like, think about any single musician who has a hit song. If you went onto their Spotify, whatever, like you would see a million other tries.
Mhm.
And even if you didn't, you might like, I don't know anyone who their first ever song has been a hit and they've sustained it. Like, actually, there is a beauty in failing a few times, and not even failing, just trying and learning from that process and making something better and better and better each time.
I mean, like, I don't know if this is your experience, but
Mm.
have you ever listened to old episodes of yourself when you first
Oh
started?
my
Isn't
God.
it like the most tragic thing you've
It's
ever
so
heard?
embarrassing. It was on my phone. I recorded it
Yeah.
on my phone.
Gemma, I still remember the first interview that I did. The way I was sweating, and
Oh,
I'm not a sweaty person,
you're
okay?
not sweating right now
Yeah,
at all.
no, no.
No.
Like it takes a lot for me to sweat. And I so distinctly remember I had gone to somebody's office to do an interview.
Yeah.
And my face was tomato red. I was sweating. I was shaking. And, you just get better. You just get better. You just have to keep going. And,
Yeah.
your equipment isn't great. You're figuring it out. Your interview style isn't, but you know what I mean? Like everyone has this universal experience. Like when I look at the first version of Array, like our old website, oh my God, it was scary.
Yeah.
It was just pure bad.
It's like,
Exactly. It's jump scare, But you're so right. I think it's about getting out and just doing the thing. And then
yeah,
you get better.
you do get better.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's kind of nice looking back now and seeing how far I've come and being like,
Absolutely.
it's a process. You can't do it all at once.
Mhm.
Again, I feel like the theme of this episode is that you can do it all, just not all right now.
Agreed. Okay, so that brings us into my next question, or our audience's next question, which is any tangible tips for comparison?
Oh, I get this question all the time. And it's kind of sad because everyone who asks me about comparison, I always think is like probably somebody that someone else is comparing themselves to.
I love that perspective, though.
Yeah.
Love that perspective.
And that is what I always say to people. But tangible tips, you want tangible tips. Figure out exactly what it is that you compare yourself on and why. Sometimes we just feel uncomfortable. We see someone on Instagram and often our reaction is not comparison. It's a secondary emotion like anger, like envy, like sadness, like shame. Pay attention to those emotions first and try and like work backwards and be like, where is this coming from? And that is where you need to start. Whether that is addressing that by just having like a mantra that you say to yourself of like, they're doing amazing and so am I. Like, that's something that I really like to say, or like, wow, I love that they're proof that I can do it. Or just like, I only know half the story. Like, find something to say about your negative thoughts that isn't just like, I feel shit and I feel jealous and I feel envious, and letting that spiral and get huge in your head. Find like a chain breaker, a cycle breaker, something that is not necessarily positive. It could even just be neutral, but it's just a different truth to the situation. Another tip is, don't automatically go to block them or unfollow them. I think that just creates avoidance. And I am specifically talking about social media here because I feel like that's where it comes from. I think that is our first inclination, is to just be like, okay, this is making me feel bad. If I'm not exposed to it, it will make me feel better. That actually just hides the feeling. If you want to feel better about your comparison, a part of you actually needs to accept that maybe you won't always be the best at everything. And that doesn't mean that you're not an amazing person. It doesn't mean that you're not deserving, or that you're not also doing cool stuff. And I feel like you probably found that as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, it's always been when I see someone doing something that, maybe I want to do or I wish I could do. For me, it's always inspirational, where I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, if they can do it, then I can too, like,
Yeah.
like what there's like, it's not like, someone was just granted like this magical thing. Like, oftentimes what people are, it's a combination, of course, of luck, but a lot of hard work too. So I'm like, okay, if I want what they have, then like maybe I should see like the kind of tactics they've employed in order to like get to the position they're at. Like, maybe I can learn something. Like, maybe I can work a little bit harder, not in a self-deprecating way, but almost as like it's like a way to feel inspired almost, you know?
Absolutely. Well, what you're talking about is upward social comparison. And upward social comparison can be two things. It can be like, I'm not as good, or it can be, wow, look at that. That's an example that this is possible. And isn't that amazing that that is validated for me?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible when you like shift that mindset.
I know,
Okay.
it's huge.
The last question: how do you forgive your parents, especially when they don't admit their mistakes?
Oof. It's not about them anymore. It's really not about them. Like, if they're it, well, the question was about like forgiving your parents. Don't do it for them, don't forgive for them, don't accept their behavior for them. What is it that you need to feel better about that situation? Completely deprioritize their feelings about it, their thoughts about it, their beliefs about it. I see this a lot with people who talk to me about their families and their parents doing things to them and not being able to admit it. Our memories are we think that they're like objective, and they're so subjective. There's like this whole field of research by this woman called Elizabeth Loftus that centers on this. And basically what she says is that memories are actually just perceptions, and your parents are probably seeing this situation so differently to you. That doesn't mean that their perspective is actually any more real. The only one that matters is your perspective, what you see is happening. And I think that, like, to give you a tangible piece of advice, go away and truly think about what you need to make peace with this, and don't allow them into that bubble. Come back, and it's your choice whether you want to say anything, but maybe you don't. Maybe you don't, and you just find a way to set the boundaries that will mean that you won't be hurt again, or that, maybe they won't have as much access to you. I think it's not black and white. Just because your parents did bad things may not mean that they're bad people. You can still love them even though you feel disappointed in them, but also like they can still be the people who loved you and raised you, and you can choose to walk away. You don't always have to just have like a clear cut answer. I don't think anyone does. It's part of getting older, is realizing that our parents are human, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I love that answer. Jemma, this has been amazing. Thank you for being here. Tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great chat. Well, my podcast is The Psychology of Your 20s, and you can follow me on Instagram at Jemma Sbeg, or you can follow the podcast at That Psychology Podcast, and we would love to hear from you or see you over there.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.